All right, guys, welcome back to the Skill of the Week. This week we are talking about stroke and TPA administration. I know we've had some fallouts recently, so we really want to make sure that everybody understands the process that we're going to be going through. First, want to talk a little bit about a few tips, tricks, things that you have to know before you administer TPA. First, blood pressure has to be below 185 over 110 before and during TPA. If your blood pressure starts skyrocketing while you're giving TPA, you need to pause it, let the physician know right away. You should be avoiding Foley catheters and IV starts while you're giving TPA. So if you think you're gonna need those, do it beforehand. It's only a last resort if you absolutely have to do one of those procedures once TPA is already infusing because of the risk of bleeding. No NGs, and obviously always watching for signs and symptoms of bleeding. So you have somebody who's a TPA candidate and doc says we're gonna go ahead and do TPA. You need to call the pharmacy. They always have a phone with them. It's written everywhere. It's all on their paperwork. It's on the front of the folders. You have to call this phone number. If somebody doesn't answer, that's a different situation. You need to take that up your chain of command and a Midas needs to be placed because somebody should always be carrying this phone. So a pharmacist should come down and mix this for you. There's always a chance, if we have multiple people getting TPA at the same time and there's, not somebody available, there's always a chance that you might have to mix this yourself. It doesn't happen very often, but you should be aware of kind of what this is and how it works. So we are gonna get this set up. So TPA comes in a powder and a liquid. You have to mix them together to reconstitute it. So we pull these out of the box. There's also, it's a double-sided spike. It literally is just like our IV spikes, but it's one on each side. So what you're gonna do is you spike it into the powder, and then you spike it into the liquid, and you let the liquid go into the powder to reconstitute this. Make sure that it's all dissolved in there, and then you can take the liquid off, and you're just left with your reconstituted TPA. So TPA is dosed by patient weight. It's very specific for each patient. So we need to make sure that we are giving the correct dose. There are cards everywhere. We have these little cheat sheets in your stroke folders. There's also, a bigger cheat sheet. This is just a really big one, just so that you guys can kind of see what we're doing. So I'm just going with a 122-pound patient just for ease here. So it's 55.5 kilograms. So for this patient, our total dose of TPA is 50 cc's. This bottle contains 100 cc's. So if we're giving 50, we need to get rid of the other 50. We give a bolus of TPA, it goes over 1 minute, and it is 10% of the dose. So 10% of that is 5 cc's, that's gonna be our bolus dose. It goes over 1 minute, and then whatever is left, that's 45, that's gonna go over 60 minutes. So that's gonna be our dosing for this patient, 122 pounds. So we take our TPA, and we're gonna spike it into our tubing like we normally would. So now pretend this is our TPA that we've spiked. We've primed our tubing and now it's in here. We are going to turn this on. And the pump is gonna give you some nice reminders just in case you kind of forget where you're at. So we're gonna go ahead and set up our pump. New patient, yes. Critical care ED, yes. Gonna select our channel. So TPA is under guardrail drugs, and it's under Altaplace. It is not under TPA. Do not search for the T's, you will not find it. So we're in the A, so we're gonna page down. You're gonna see a bunch of different Altaplace. These are for different things. Obviously, if your patient has a PE, that's not the dosing that we're looking for a stroke patient. So I don't see Altaplace stroke, so we're gonna page down. It's the very last one, Altaplace stroke. We're gonna select that because the pump is programmed to do the bolus and the continuous infusion for you. And now it's asking for our weight. Our patient is 55.5 kilograms, so they are less than 100 kilograms. Is this correct? Yes, it is. Now it's gonna remind us. So we're priming our tubing, and we're supposed to remove the excess from the tubing. Do not try to remove the waste from the bottle. What'll happen, it'll spill around the outside of the bottle because you used a pretty big spike. You put a pretty significant hole in this bottle already. So if you try and put a needle in here and flip it upside down, the TPA is gonna run around that. You're gonna waste a bunch of it onto the floor. You don't wanna do that. So once you have everything primed, you're gonna take your syringe. So our waste, if you remember for our patient, is 50 cc's. So I am going to hook this up, and I'm going to pull 50 cc's from this bottle of TPA. The reason that we do this, it's not safe for you to leave all 100 cc's in there, just in case all of it runs through. You want to keep your patient as safe as possible. So we are going to remove the excess just so that there's no chance that any excess gets put into our patient. The other thing to take note of with this, so I like to put it in here before because it clamps it off, because if you pull too much and you try and put it back in, what's going to happen? So if everything is in here, nothing is really going to happen when you do this. If you don't and your tubing is hooked up to the patient and you try and put this back into the bag, it's not going to go that way. It's going to bolus into your patient. So make sure that your tubing and everything is all in here so that it's clamped off and you're not bolusing your patient. The other thing to take note of is don't pull too much because you can't put it back. If you try and put this back, it's not going to go back up into the bottle. So I accidentally pulled more than 50. So there are a few ways that you can try and fix that, but we're not really going to talk about that. Just be very, very careful when you're pulling this that you're not pulling too much. You would have to, get a needle and try and spike it back up, and that's just a whole mess in and of itself. So just be extra careful while you're pulling this. So this is our waste. We just get rid of it. So now we have what's left, our dose for our patient, which for us is 50 cc's. In here, I'll open our pump reset. So let's reprogram this. So we're gonna go down to Altaplace for stroke. Less than 100 kilograms for our patient. So it says prime the tubing, remove the excess from the Y site, not from the bottle. Confirm that we did that. So the patient weight is 55.5. Our volume to be infused, that's the total volume that we're gonna be giving this patient. For our patient, based on their weight, remember that was 50 mLs. Next thing we have to do is program our bolus. We're gonna go down here to bolus. It automatically, based on your weight, gives you your bolus. And right here, it's telling us that our bolus is 5 mLs. If you remember from our dosing sheet, that is correct. So we'll open this up and we're gonna go ahead and start. So this bolus, this 5 cc bolus is gonna run over 1 minute, and then it's automatically going to kick over to our dose and run that over an hour. So when you think about it, we've had some issues with some charting lately. If you think things through logically, so if we're giving a bolus over 1 minute and then our TPA is starting right after it, in the MAR, our TPA should be scanned at one time and the continuous rate should be scanned 1 minute later. Exactly 1 minute later, because our bolus runs for 1 minute and it automatically kicks over to our regular rate. So we'll give this a second here. You'll hear the beep when your bolus is done. So our bolus is done and now it's kicking over to our rate. And it's telling us that our volume to be infused now is 45, which is correct because we had a total dose of 50, a bolus of 5, which leaves us with 45 mLs to be dosed over 1 hour. So it's going at 45 an hour. I'm gonna pause this. The other thing to really be careful of, so you have exactly 45 cc's left in here. So what's gonna happen if you let all 45 run completely to the end? You're gonna run a bunch of air into your tubing and you're gonna have to do some major troubleshooting. You need to be very careful when you're doing this. You are one-to-one with this patient, so you need to be watching your TPA very closely, in addition to watching your patient very closely. So when the bottle empties and you only have TPA left in this drip chamber, you need to be undoing this and spiking your flush so that you don't run air into this line and you don't run into issues when you're trying to get the rest out of your tubing. So like I said, this is a very exact dose. So we have 45 cc's exactly. So what happens when all of it runs out of the bag and most of it runs into the patient? Part of our 45 cc's is still in our tubing. That's why we do our flush. So we should always be doing a 50 cc flush immediately following our TPA, and that should be timed exactly at the end of your TPA, because you want to continue to give what's in this line to your patient in a continuous stream of TPA. So you will spike your flush, and once your pump starts dinging that your 45 is done, you're going to program your flush to run at the exact same rate, because you're still putting TPA into your patient. You don't want to speed it up all of a sudden and give them a bolus of TPA again. So this has to run at the exact same rate as your TPA. So you can go ahead and program that. While you're doing this, you are one-to-one with your patient, like I mentioned. You are to be doing 15-minute, Q15-minute vital signs and neuro checks. The neuro checks are located under the ad hoc. It's the one that actually says neuro check. And the entire thing has to be filled out. Every single box in that neuro check, every 15 minutes has to be filled out, or it's a fallout. You need to set your pump or your monitor to be running every 15 minutes, because if you miss that 15 minutes, you can't go back and redo that. So you have to set this to run every 15 minutes. We also need to be aware of how we're charting these Q15 minutes. So it can be shorter than 15 minutes. It cannot be longer than 15 minutes. So if we start TPA, let's just say at 1:03, our next vital sign and neuro check technically isn't due until 1:18. You want to try and get that onto an even number though. So with 1:18, you want to round back. So you would do your next neuro check at 1:15. So it's shorter than 15 minutes. You're going from 1:03 to 1:15. So that's only 12 minutes, which is okay. And then go 15 minutes from there so that you're on the 15, the 30, the 45, and the hour. It just makes math a little bit easier. The problem is some people, so if you start at 1:03 and your next one is due at 1:18, some people round up to 1:20 to try and get on the even numbers, but now it's been more than 15 minutes. Now you're at 17 minutes, that's a fallout. Even if you do absolutely everything else right, that is a fallout. Again, every box has to be checked. Every vital sign has to be in there. Trying to think what else I'm missing. Just be very careful when you're doing TPA. It's a high-risk drug, obviously high risk for bleeding. You have to have a second nurse. You have to scan the meds. Don't try and auto-enter them, but make sure your timing is exactly right on them. You have to do a TPA timeout. Do not forget to do your TPA timeout. That's also in your ad hoc forms. Think of this as a big, procedure. You would do a timeout before a procedure. This is a high-risk med. You need to do a timeout beforehand. I think that's about it for, starting TPA, mixing TPA, doing some of your charting. If you have any extra questions, reach out to me, reach out to Belinda, our stroke coordinator. She's more than willing to go through this with people. I'm more than willing to go through this with people. I will have these back in my office all week if people want to practice mixing and drawing up TPA. Otherwise, we hope to see you next week for our skill of the week. Thanks.